please make yourself comfortable. Do come in. Thank you. And welcome to this premiere panel session, introducing the Gold Principles Group, Value Chain Collaboration and Shared Sustainability Goals. So I'm Dave Knight, and I'm the founder of One Planet Limited, a sustainability advisory and assurance firm. I've worked across many sectors since the 1990s, in particular in minerals and metals, to help professionalise and advance sustainable business practices. I've been involved in the development of a number of responsible business standards and love bringing together stakeholders to help create greener, cleaner and fairer commerce. So I convene something called the Roundtable on the Responsible Recycling of Metals, but I'm here today in my role as lead coordinator of the Gold Principles Group. So just to quickly outline the objectives, and then I'll introduce my esteemed panel here. So, as I mentioned, I've been working for kind of 30 years to improve working conditions and reduce the negative impacts of business. However, unfortunately, I'm still busy. I would like to say that everything is sorted and that we can all kind of retire and relax a little bit, but no, I'm as busy as ever and many intractable challenges remain. We can clearly see some of these in the jewellery value chain, and I also see these as clear opportunities to really come together across supply chains and markets to define common goals, identify shared solutions and drive performance. So we need to build closer relationships and create these opportunities and the spaces to collaborate. We can signpost to the existing tools. There's quite a lot of solutions out there. And we can develop new ones as needed, but we need to kind of increase that capacity, offer guidance and support. So this session is going to explore the learnings from the early evolution of the Gold Principles Group, considering the potential contributions and obstacles to making progress in the sector. But before we get into that discussion, let me introduce the panellists. So Dr. Gaetano Cavalieri needs no introduction to most of you, the president of CIBJO, the World Jewellery Confederation. He has a distinguished career leading CIBJO, advising governments and trade bodies. And Gaetano can help us understand the jewellery industry's strategic perspective. And John Mulligan is head of sustainability strategy and the climate change lead at the World Gold Council, also chair of the ISO Technical Committee 174, covering the fields of jewellery and precious materials, and is president of the CIBJO Sustainability Commission. Iris van der Veken is executive director and secretary general of the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030, and a member of 100 Women at Davos Inclusive Leadership Council. She has a background in law, public affairs and ESG, and brings over 25 years of international experience and multi-stakeholder collaboration. And Suzanne Brooks is General Manager Standards for the Responsible Jewellery Council, experienced professional in the jewellery, natural resources and fast-moving consumer goods sectors. Suzanne brings particular expertise in standards and certification to the session. Okay. So I would also like to extend a welcome to those who are online, and hopefully we should have some time for questions from the audience as well. So do make me aware if you do have any questions. So just to kick us off, John, you were central to the creation of the Gold Principles Group and have long promoted industry collaboration. Can you build on my short introduction, please, to help set the scene from when the initiative was first discussed, questions you previously received here at previous events, to where we are today?
Thanks, Dave. It's a bit loud. Thanks, Dave. Let me just stand up because I can't actually see the slides. And there's... so I can. Not paying attention. When we first started to talk about the Gold Principles Group, it was at an event over 3 years ago that we had convened with the London Bullion Market Association. And even when we started to talk about what that event would contain, the agenda, we realized that when we talked about sustainability in particular, we weren't always talking about the same thing. They had a very specific focus. We had some of the same shared goals, but increasingly we said, okay, well, first of all, we need to build solid foundations of understanding so that when we talk about sustainability, we're not talking about vague aspirations. That conversation led to a working group, some of the participants are in this room, 85, I think, organizations over just under a year arrived at a declaration. The reason why we did it is on this slide. Basically, the challenges we're trying to face, the goals we're trying to address are simply too big for any one company, any one segment of a industry or supply chain to deal with. We need to come together, and if we do, then we can add value to each other's contributions. So that was the idea. A lot of small print you can't read, apologies. We eventually got to a declaration of 10 principles. 14 different associations signed up to it. So we now have associations, all of them represented on this panel, and from the jewelry sector, CIBJO, Watch and Jewellery Initiative, RJC, the World Gold Council, other associations across the globe covering everything, that included the Chinese, Indian associations, the Middle East. So we were trying to say this is a global initiative, and this is what we have agreed is significant in terms of our future endeavors when it comes to sustainability. So we start to pin down what our shared goals are. I know you can't read them on there, but they will be clearer later. These are the organizations. As I say, 14 key organizations. We're still talking to a few others. We have some very meaningful observers too. So this is very much a global initiative covering the whole supply chain. And as I've already suggested, the reason why we did it, there's a lot of good work. There's a lot of good established guidance, standardization, but to some extent, what was missing was the foundations. So a lot of the top of that pyramid were developed before people agreed on a shared set of principles. So that was kind of what started as, this is where we are. We've now got an implementation roadmap, and we can discuss that later if we wish. But we're saying, this is what the aspirations are, this is what the short-term, medium, and long-term view is on those 10 principles, and they are the principles. 2 years later, this means that once we agreed the declaration, we can meet to try and work out what it means to actually implement a plan, implement action on each of those principles. And that's kind of where we are now. We had a meeting here yesterday. We have 2 or 3 or 4 meetings, depending on the cadence of opportunity, to allow the industry to come together and try and converge. And I think for what we'd like to think of is once we move forward to progress, and we can talk about what that looks like in a second, once we move forward, then the question is, how do we evidence that progress? How do we start to talk? And frankly, might we be showing leadership to other value chains, to other sectors?
Thank you. That's a great introduction. So just to kind of bring it closer to home, most people here have interest in the jewellery sector, and that's why we're here. So Gaetano, what's your view on how value chain collaboration can help jewellery companies move from more individual compliance to shared solutions? You know, and where are the key challenges in your eyes?
Well, the role of CIBJO, the World Jewelry Confederation, which is representing the entire supply chain from mine to retail, is to harmonize international rules. And because we are the one recognized and sitting at the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, we are committed, not only because we are recognized, but because we believe in those principles since ever. We are trying very hard to put the people together And when I say the people, means the major experts in the world. You know, we have a number of experts here in the room, this side and that side, in order to hand over the tools that we discuss, we face, we try to find solution as we do, in order to comply with those principles that originally, when the group was established, we discussed. I mean, Joan knows, as Iris, as well, Suzanne knows very well how we did, and the work that is being done to define those 10 principles. No need to define 20, 30, 100, even though could be, but still, you know, it's better that we focus on what we do. So the necessity of doing it is let the industry grow and flourish, which is a full compliance with our mission statement, as well disclosure. And why I'm talking about disclosure, because I go to the principle 10, reporting. What you have to report. But report means also disclosing all the elements that you use in order to get from the mine, processing the product that the mine is extracting, how to process, hand over to the next level, up to the manufacturer and then to the retailer, and on top of it, to the consumer. Because it is important that we put all this supply chain, which apparently is difficult. I have to say, honestly, the difficulties is to translate from an apparent difficult principles in something that is easy. The people cannot waste time, including us. So when we hand over to the retailer, we have to hand over in a way that they can explain the consumer, in order to let the consumer to have a clear, conscious decision to choose what is legitimate. Because in all these things, in all the principles, you know, responsible sourcing, advances, SDGs up to the 10th, the element that link everything is transparency, is legitimacy, is full disclosure, and I can continue in that. So this is the element of the entire supply chain, because the element that at the end is going to be a win-win or lose-lose is how to the industry, including the entire supply chain through the retailer, is handing over an offer to the final consumer. So we are absolutely sure, because we have done a lot of research, a lot of discussion. I mean, our experience about the industry, I'm not talking about my personal experience, the industry experience is so important and so heavy that at the end of the day, we can offer to the final consumer something that has a real value, not only as a result of the value of the components, meaning gold, platinum, silver, diamonds, pearls, color stone, and so on, but also the value of the added value of the processes made by the companies, and also the added values of the principles that are handed over to the consumer. So that's our role.
Great. So we're beginning to understand that it's our role as the industry to be able to deliver something to a consumer that they don't have to worry about, and they can enjoy the beauty of the product, but also have that reassurance everything is done well within the processes. So if we look at how that works in practice, and Iris, if we can turn to you in terms of the jewellery brands and the retailers, what expectations do they have of the upstream supply chain? How are these developing? And how do you think the industry can best respond so that they can then pass this on to the consumer?
Well, first of all, it's Wonderful to be here in Vicenza, and allow me to thank you, Dr. Gaetano, Cavalieri, and CIBJO for uniting us. And, here we are, the Responsible Jewelry Council, CIBJO, the World Gold Council, present in one room. And I think that's very important that we have this collaborative approach, because the more that we're going to disconnect a vision, the more we're going to confuse stakeholders, policymakers, customers, etc. So I'm really delighted to be here. And I also have a few slides, so allow me but to come back to your question, when we talk about jewelry and watches and what we sell to consumers, it's trust. And I think wherever you are in the supply chain, it's not just at brand level. You need trust from the moment you're going to source, your colored gemstones or your diamonds or your gold. It's really, and it's what you talked about, Gaetano, it's really that value chain connection that's critical. And we see a lot of challenges, and I just want to try to put them here, because when we look at different materials, different materials have different impacts, and they have different impacts from the moment they're mined and the moment indeed they're transferred through that supply chain. And all the components, if we think about human rights due diligence, environmental due diligence, if we think about decent labor, if we think about the ecosystem, the water, the nature, climate, all these components need to be integrated to deliver that trust to the consumer. So when I talk about sustainability today, it's not the traditional definition that we had 25 years ago. And I think that's where we focused as an industry very much on social justice, which is essential. Human rights is critical. Decent labor, overhours, seasonality, those key components for our industry, of course we need to embrace them. Gender, another topic close to my heart. But what's added on, and it's not just because of legislation, is our dependency on nature, on water, on environment, the topic of decarbonization. And these are complicated topics, Gaetano, as you said. And that means is that we need to do a lot of efforts for the industry to actually educate, bring practical tools so that we can really showcase what we're doing. And I would like to bring the link to compliance. I know people don't like compliance and regulations, but the reality is, even though there's omnibus, and even though some people say, well, it's kind of slowing down. Yes, it's slowing down, and to an extent, originally I wasn't so happy about it, but at the same time, I do believe SMEs need more time and space to be able to deliver. But the reality is, we need to understand where our gemstones are coming from. We need to go back to the origin of mine. We need to understand what positive, negative impact we're making, and then we need to neutralize. And we can only do that in a landscaping approach. We can only do that collectively because we're all sourcing from the same places. And we know very much where we're sourcing from, and we also know what is happening there. So to go back to some of the topics, Mother Nature is setting the agenda, and I think we know that. We also see it already if it's droughts or fires or other issues. We need resilient supply chains. We also need, I think, much more circular thinking. I had the privilege to be at the VICENZAORO Award. So how are we going to bring those educational skills that people are going to rethink which materials they're using and eco-design? And then, of course, we need data when we think about product passports to our customers. And again, I think that's why it's so important to have this collaboration.
Thank you. And it was notable in one of the slides, if you could just go back to the impact slide, and you look at the gold line there, and it's all dark blue, representing a higher impact. So we've got this unique opportunity as well as an industry to come together and address some of that risk, turn it into opportunities. Okay, so I just want to look at the alignment between consumer-facing claims and what the supply chain can practically deliver. You mentioned, we all source from the same places, we might know where they come from, but maybe that's not always necessarily the case of knowing exactly where they come from. Can we be confident in some of the claims that are made, and how can we give consumers that confidence? Suzanne?
Thank you. And also just to say thank you very much for inviting us into the conversation, and to CIBJO for inviting us here today. It's great to be here. Thank you. That indeed is a very complex question, I think. I think certainly when a consumer reads a claim or a responsible claim, they're looking at it, first of all, saying, can I trust this? And what does it actually mean? And I do believe that the consumer really does want to buy sustainable products, but often mistrust or confusion will hold them back. And I think, again, that does come down to, and there's a 2023 Deloitte report on consumer behavior that says, I think it's 74% of consumers want to buy sustainable products, but only 17% of them actually do. So again, that comes down, you can see the difference there in terms of the mistrust and also consumers understanding what the risks and their own interpretation of what the risks are as well. So that could be from the slide that we saw, could be critical minerals all the way through to green claims. So there is a lot to consider. That the consumer landscape when it comes to claims is very complex. So for businesses, I think the question is more about how can misleading claims be avoided. And I think certainly from the Responsible Jewellery Council, this is something that we have worked a lot on over the last consultation and update of the Code of Practices, which came out in 2024. There is a claims provision that has been strengthened around those requirements for members to help businesses understand the complexities around what claims are. And, you know, from a signatories perspective, coming onto the group, I think, you know, being able to provide practical guidance to members when it comes to making claims. So first up, we would look at evidence and transparency. We've spoken about that, and trust for the consumer. You know, rooting the claim in evidence and retaining the data of that evidence so that it can be audited. Again, it's being able to challenge the information that's coming in from the claim. Understanding the scope of the claim and avoid misleading consumers by saying that the claim covers the entire supply chain, when in fact it is certain points along the chain. And then again, you know, anchoring it to credible standards like the Responsible Jewellery Standards and the Code of Practices as well. The frameworks that are provided there ensures that members do have their claims audited, verified, third-party, international, but also in addition to provenance claims as well, considering other claims with regards to sustainability. It's about the membership, it's about certification, even the use of logos. So so the complex nature of where those claims needs to be aligned in that respect. And then you can talk about communications, consistency across packaging, marketing in that respect as well. So I think for the consumer, it's a very complex landscape, but luckily with the collaboration of the Gold Principles Group and also the signatories, you know, there's a lot of information and a lot of materials and a lot of guidance that can be provided in order to help the members and the wider industry as a whole.
Great. So we've heard an example with the Responsible Jewellery Code of Practice. So I'd just like to kind of open it up as well. So if you wanted to buy responsible jewellery, would you all be clear? Or responsible gold? Would you know what to look for? And let's just have a show of hands if you would, and you're totally clear. Put your hand up, and maybe I've got an informed audience here, and I can't see the people online. But yeah, we've got... Wow.
They have chosen somebody with the logo of Responsible Jewellery Council in America, and I'm based in Europe. And no, it's not difficult, it's just to pass the information.
Okay, so we have some informed people in the audience, which is great. And if they've read the Code of Practices, that's fantastic. 542 pages. But...
That's the guidance. That's the guidance.
That's the guidance. My apologies. The standard, yeah. Yeah.
They ask questions, but they ask also answers, and they ask to know. So we are at the end of the chain.
Yeah.
We are the one they consult to have
Please.
I really like your example. I think there's a huge opportunity at retail level. I sometimes do secret shopping, and I will go into a boutique, and I will not wear jewelry so that they know, she is in the jewelry business. But really asking those critical questions. Oh, do you know where those diamonds are coming from? Oh, I really like that color gemstone. Could you tell me something about it? And then there are different models. There are some brands that are doing amazingly well, telling the story in a meaningful way that's credible. And that's, Suzanne, what you talked about. I think, but there are retailers that are really telling very funny stories that are uncredible. And I think that's an enormous opportunity also for this group, and I think also for you, Gaetano, with CIBJO, to really see that there's some core messaging that we're aligned with, so we're consistent to the consumer. Because it's very dangerous, I think, to not have that.
And you make a very good point there with regards to, obviously, when you were talking about the Responsible Jewellery Council standards and CIBJO standards and the other standards and certification and guidance that's out there. That is the key to collaboration. That is the key to the harmonization across many of the certifications and standards and guidance that are out there to ensure that there is that cross-collaboration, that cross-recognition in some ways of what's there, for ultimately the consumer, for the auditors and everyone who's involved in the claims and talking about it and the stories.
So I think that a really good point is there is information out there. You found it after some work. We have produced, along with this panel, a lot of material. What we haven't done is shared it, and what we haven't done is put it all in one place. And I think, so I can speak for both the Gold Principles Group, also for CIBJO, that is an objective of both the Sustainable Development Commission and the Gold Principles Group, and I think it's fair to say, Iris, we share that objective, to try and start to cross-reference our material, so you don't find one thing in one place and one thing in another, that you are clear that they're consistent, and if they're not consistent, it's our job to make them so. And I think that is one of the fundamental drivers of this thing called the Gold Principles Group, and we do think it's a model which we hope will be more widely applicable, because if there are, we've already got, 20-something, 30 documents and guidance documents we've pulled together already. The question then becomes, how do we simplify them? How do we summarize them? How do we make it really easy so that you don't say, well, we have to go to find an RJC certified jeweler in the States, when everybody eventually should be performing to certain standards, or at least being able to answer the questions that the Iris asks. I'm not a secret buyer, but I also spend my time going to events and talking to people, explaining what I try and do. And does that mean anything material to you? Is it relevant when I say sustainability, climate, nature? And I can say at the moment, the vast majority of respondents kind of shrug their shoulders. Some say it is meaningful, but I don't know what the next step is. Where do I go? And so I think, I'd like to think this is we're now a few years in, but I'd like to think we're building a foundation by which we can say we're all talking the same language, we're all talking about a coherent supply chain rather than lots and lots of little fragments along the chain.
Thank you. And just to come back to Gaetano, so you did mention, transparency is key as well. That's one of the things that the Gold Principles Group is aiming to achieve, to provide that window on the whole gold value chain in this case. But where do jewellery businesses struggle the most in terms of accelerating progress? And you represent, and CIBJO represents, is it over 7 million? And I know, you work very hard and have probably spoken to a large amount, perhaps not 7 million jewellery industry businesses, but I know that you're incredibly prolific. So what's your take on what are the key challenges of the information that they need?
Well, first of all, we communicate to all our members. And obviously, since the existence of the social media, we put everything in the social media, and our communication director Stephen, that I don't know if he's in the room. Yes, he's there. You have a taller guy in front, so I don't see. Alessandro, could you please move? I don't see Stephen. Yeah, thank you very much. And evidently, we need to bring the information. And when I say we, it's not CIBJO, it's the industry in general as a whole, to bring the information to the people, to the consumer, to the public, but also to the industry. Because, I mean, what we have seen in the principles that has been showed previously, the element is, and our friends was mentioning the blue books as well, the Responsible Jewelry Council principles, or the pillars from the Watch and Jewelry Initiative, or all those elements on which we all collectively are working, let's say, let me define what the way we define the activity in CIBJO is a living document referring to the blue books, each one. Why living document? Because we discuss every single day, and there is people in the room, part of all those, including John, including Iris, Suzanne, Edward, Rui, and many others in the room. We are constantly, on daily basis, make discussion and adjournments on those documents that once a year are brought to the attention of the General Assembly and the different commissions and committees within CIBJO along the entire supply chain. What does it mean? That in the same way that we do not want, as never did, leave anyone behind, but on top of it, we don't want to leave any rules behind. So the modernity of what has been done in the past, since the last 100 years, so it's not one day, it's 100 years this year. And we are going to celebrate this year in this place, in this city, in this fair in September, the celebration of the Congress, the 100 Years Congress. And it is essential, and we see that, the feedback of the people, because we received email, we received questions, we received inquiry, we received yesterday from another country, important country, by the way, which obviously I don't mention because still is ongoing, the request to use the Blue Books as thermal reference. The rules of the Blue Books in many countries in the world are national law. I mention on top of it France. You know, France, the Blue Books was adopted by the Parliament as a national law. So that means that what has been done at the past and ongoing is accepted as a national law. And for instance, you know, apart our members, but let me mention the members of RJC or Watch and Jewelry Initiative. I'm referring to the top brands. Well, the top brands, they are using it, and the top brands are in France, basically, you know, apart the other major brands. But if we talk about Louis Vuitton, Cartier, Kering, and so on, including the watch people, you know, is the Fédération Horlogère that is collecting the entire watch industry system in Switzerland. You know, we are talking about companies such as Rolex, or such as the Swatch Group, or such as Chopin, or Patek Philippe, and so on. Well, they are following this thing. If you look at the rules, sorry, and I conclude, if you look at the rules, for instance, Rolex, is written there. So it's not something that is, you know, just reporting. So when we do this kind of job, and through not only our direct information, but also our membership and the member of our member information towards the industry itself and the consumer, that means that we have reached our goal. But still is not enough, because it's an everyday, ongoing, living activity.
Thank you. And I just wanted to pick up on that. Before I do, would you mind turning back to the first set of slides, and just so that we can have the principles on screen? And so the other set, please. And we just need to have the final slide on screen. But I just wanted to ask and pick up on this point, particularly around smaller organisations and how the gold industry and the Gold Principles Group can really support smaller organisations as well. With maybe less well-resourced, how can we avoid just adding an extra burden? Yeah, thank you, that's perfect. So how can we avoid having an extra burden on the SMEs and the small jewellers? Go on, Iris. Oh, John? Yeah.
No, oh, well, so I think when most of us have tried to advance particular principles, and I'm talking about my experience both within CIBJO and the Watch and Jewellery Initiative, we often found, or still find, that there's an obstacle in capacity building. There's a lot of small, very small companies with certain small resources or a very dedicated focus. And so what we have discovered is some of our expectations and aspirations basically need to be supported in ways that we wouldn't expect of a larger company or a more established, well-resourced brand. So I think the question then becomes, is the SME an obstacle to progress, or is this the opportunity by which we can advance progress in quite some substantial scale? And that means we have to understand the capacity and what tools, and we mentioned a lot of tools already, but what tools are easily accessible and digestible and actionable by the SMEs. And so I think it's fair to say we're all very mindful of that. You mentioned the big brands that Gaetano mentioned. A lot of those are pretty much certainly on the curve and ahead of the curve in many instances. They don't really need that much help. We still need to maintain consistency. We don't want, frankly, the leaders to depart from the sector without the rest of the industry moving. So building tools and then adapting them, and this is probably equivalent to some of your conversations at the RJC too, is how do you make this immediately actionable? And really importantly, how do you incentivize the SME? How do you say this is an opportunity for you to add value to your business? Because if you don't express and articulate the incentive, this just seems like a burden. It seems like something that is out there, but we'll address it tomorrow and not today. So I think articulating the opportunity, simplifying the resource, sharing so we can build capacity, even if, frankly, many of our stakeholders don't need it. I think that is a kind of key, and certainly my learning from both the Gold Principles Group, but also my experience in CIBJO and elsewhere.
Iris, I think you've got something to add.
Yes, I'm just going to try to ask if I can see my slides again. Someone can help me.
Well, we're jumping back and forth, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know how it works. No, let's just see. Wait, let me just... Okay, so first of all, I want to say this is already the approach of the initiative, and we believe it's very important to have brands as frontrunners that are inspirational, that share that knowledge, and Gaetano, you know that as being part of the board, and we have some incredible leaders there. But as an initiative, we believe it's very important to not leave the SME community behind and really help them advance on topics that seem to be complex, but are also really relevant for them to start engaging with. And I think something I want to just give as a practical example is, for example, and it's something I'm actually with humility proud of. 2 years ago, no one was talking about nature except the big brands. And you know this, Gaetano. Thanks to caring, let's be very honest, to Mrs. Marie-Claire Daveux, who has been a front runner on this topic, we said, why don't we start with 120 days of nature learning for SMEs? So we had actually a program of 4 months where companies were going through education, and then giving them a tool which we call the Nature Action Playbook, with little steps to take, but also the opportunity to get help desk support. So to really understand, what is my dependency on nature? Why does it make business sense? How do I need to tackle these topics? But also very much from a compliance perspective for at a later stage. So we've done it, we have the first results, we will be announcing them soon, but we saw it's possible. Because today we see that a number of companies have shaped their nature roadmap, including about 30 companies that are smaller, so we're quite proud of that. And I think a second tool is what we call the Impact Action Journey Framework, where we realize that the big complexity for SMEs today is compliance. Because the smaller enterprises need to be compliant in their commercial contracts to the bigger companies. They get very nervous about human rights, due diligence, environmental due diligence, so many new topics. And there actually we started to build a framework with concrete questions and templates and guidance that gives them the opportunity to action and then also report on progress. And that has been going live now, and we have 90% of our members up and running. And I think the beauty is that you get your own management dashboards, and then we talk about business value, because if you have a small enterprise and you do want to have your management report, you need to have that. So aligned with policies. And then of course, finally, and this is something we've been working very much closely with CIBJO on, is really resources. The first thing is to educate. So we've been really investing a lot in education on human rights due diligence, on introduction to nature and water. And in March, we'll be launching a water stewardship tool for smaller enterprises. And I think we really look forward to testing this with the industry. We've tested it with a few suppliers and brands, but to scale it and to make it better. And I think one final point is there are many tools out there. And I agree, John, and I think Suzanne and Gaetano, we need to bring them together in one place. But also I think tools need to be relevant to legislation. I think there are too many tools and guidance out there that is not relevant to policy. We're going to confuse people. We're going to put an extra burden on top of it. So for me, that alignment with the policymakers is critical.
Thank you. So we've heard that we've got to articulate the business case, how we add value, make it easier, simplify, make sure that it links to core business needs like compliance, and simplify it so it's easier for people to access. So as a gold principles group across the value chain, we've got this opportunity to start put that in practice and not necessarily recreate the wheel all the time. We've seen a lot of that, but we need to increase access and communicate more. So I want to that's great. And just to check in, is there any more comments on how we can get SMEs involved? Otherwise, I want to just take us back to standards, because in the same way that there's many different tools and guidance, there's also quite a lot of standards. And so how can we kind of support that collaboration and certification programs? How can they complement each other? And how can the work of the Gold Principles Group support that process? And Suzanne, you're probably best placed to start us off with that one.
Thank you. And I can perhaps reflect on what Gaetano was saying with regards to this all being, it's a living world that we're living in, a living space with the materials, with the documentation, with the standards. It's constantly evolving. When we're looking at members, we've been talking about sort of the scale and the scope of our members, from different points of the supply chain, also different sizes, the smaller businesses as well. So from a standard setting organization or certification perspective, you're getting standards that represent the supply chain, also from mine through to retail, large organizations, big brands, smaller companies, manufacturers, retailers, right down to the cutting edge. So with a standard setting organization, what you're getting is the constant evolution, the stakeholder engagement, the consultation. The RJC standards are revised at least every 4 to 5 years. That's as part of the ISEAL credibility that we have. The RJC is the only standard setting organization within that criteria. So from that perspective, that from a stakeholder engagement and consultation, those standards are constantly going to evolve. So they are going to involve the materials, the information, the updates on legislation, claims guides, all of it is all going to be connected. And that's what we talk about with the Gold Principles group as well. It's the evolution of this and the connection of that. So when we're looking at action plans for each of these principles, when we do look at, say, for example, the Code of Practices, you're looking at it from the standard through to the training, through to the education, that continuous improvement. So that's what we're getting with the standard setting and with the certification. And with the Gold Principles group and the collaboration, what you can expect to see through that is that continuous improvement and engagement.
Great. So we're hearing how you're able to also recognise a range of other standards and how that kind of interoperability work is moving forward. Now, if you look further upstream, and John, perhaps you can add to this as well, obviously the mines, the refiners and others might suffer a bit from audit fatigue and demands for information. And how do they address that, and how can we kind of simplify this? And maybe you want to also add.
Thanks. There's a few things there. I'd just like to pick up on a few comments, because I think people have said there's a lot of guidance out there. There's, we need to simplify it. What there is not yet is a clear connect the dots. So how does the RJC Code of Practice reflect on the LBMA's responsible gold guidance? And to start to answer your question, what is their equivalency or a handshake between jewelry standards and mining standards, for example? And so the World Gold Council, where we talk about them from mine to market, when it comes to gold, the responsible gold supply is now produced by the responsible gold mining principles, mandatory for all our members, which means in what we call transparent costed production, 60-odd% is actually produced under those standards. Transparent, audited, 51 standards of performance. So we understand, but absolutely, they are a part of a wider sector which is undergoing transformation. Without going into too much detail, the question is, there are multiple mining standards. For gold, there's a responsible gold mining standard, but if you're responsible gold mining principles, but if you're Canadian, you probably also mine towards sustainable mining, the Canadian standard. If you also happen to be a company of scale, you might mine to the ICMM standard, etc. So there is a big move towards harmonization. There's a big move towards something called the consolidated mining standard. What is important is not, for this audience, perhaps the detail, because there's thousands and thousands of pages, I was going to say, but certainly thousands and thousands of words to consume. What is important is someone makes it easy for you to connect the dots. Someone makes sure that the person developing the mining standard is talking to the refiner, is talking to the jeweler. And I think that's what's missing for me. So I think we build capacity, we define the tools, we explain, we hopefully simplify, or certainly simplify access, and then we start to connect the dots. And I can say 21 years in the gold industry, miners rarely speak to jewelers, let's be honest. Refiners rarely speak to jewelers, apart from the clients. They certainly don't engage in this kind of discussion. There was a question about the fact that discussion, is there too much talk? And I absolutely sympathize with that. But this is quite early on, and it's only 3 or 4 or 5 years where we started to get people to talk. If we're going to get them to agree to share, we can start to connect the dots. And so for me, I didn't really answer your question, but I think in terms of the trend is harmonization. The thing that comes after that is still describing why that standard is material, relevant, of value to you and your business. And for us, as the industry representatives, trying to connect the dots.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to actually dive in, John. Price of gold has risen, people might have noticed, quite a lot, 2025. Is this presenting additional challenges to the value chain?
I think this is your curveball question, isn't it? Additional challenges. So there are quite clearly challenges in just market participants responding to the price. Okay, so I'm buying gold, it's more expensive than it was before. That I don't think is the point of your question, one of the challenges that we are facing in the gold market is when we talk about responsible gold, we at the World Gold Council think we know what we're talking about. We think, okay, well, we've defined lines. Once you look over that line to the informal sector, to gold that's produced outside of regulation, unfortunately often outside of law, the question is, well, what does that mean? The price is tempting a lot more of that to expand. Basically, if you can achieve such high values for material, then the temptation to do that irresponsibly, the temptation to actually be vulnerable to forces that will exploit your ability to mine, or in some cases, force you to mine, that is a greater challenge. It is one that for many, many years, when we drew that line between responsible gold and irresponsible gold, we classed that as our job was to build the wall, to keep that responsible gold out. The scale of that gold production now and the scale of the challenge is such that we can't keep building the wall. We have to find ways to build the bridge, if you like, between allowing what we can identify as responsible production and then trying to bring it into the fold, bring it into the mainstream. The challenge is extraordinarily complex, but it has become, in the last few years, a mission of the World Gold Council. And so, to go back to your question, the price at this level makes some things easier. It makes some things easier to fund and make more affordable and attract positive agents into the market. It also makes it an expanding market, and therefore the challenges keep growing.
Thank you. I'm just conscious that we have, maybe 7 or so minutes left, and I just wanted to just see if there's any questions that are arising from everybody in the room. Nothing at the moment. Okay. And yeah.
And Maurice, you say that sometimes we can do our best, but the problem with the governance and the regulation is an issue. And I'm volunteer for Diamond for Peace, for example, and we have Victoria. She's fantastic. She tries to follow everything to be sustainable, and with bees and gantries and try to find diamonds when it's the season. And the government decided to give the accreditation instead of $25, $250. For her, it was impossible to do. So I decided to be a business angel on one level, just for one person. This is an issue. And when we have people like that, to try to follow all the rules, isn't it a solution, because you are all there, to be strong enough just to say to a government, look, for those who are following the rules, can you make, please, an adaptation for something?
Well, yeah. First of all, I think the world has never been so complex. So it used to be that actually governments gave us certainty and strong policies and consistency, and in most of the world, stability. So today, the whole world is shaken up. I think what is important for the industry as a role is that, of course, we need to be closer to the policy makers, that they understand the complexity of our supply chains, depending on gold, colored gemstones, diamonds, etc. Because sometimes we see that when policies are created and there has been no engagement with governments, that sometimes it has very strange repercussions that are very difficult to operationalize. So it is really not only an administrative burden to the company, but a high cost. So for me, that consistency in public affairs is essential. And if we talk, for example, with Europe on what's going on with Omnibus, because actually most of the big brands were ready for the legislation. Now it's softened.
The dilution of some of the proposed legislation.
Yeah, proposed legislation. For example, we as an initiative, we've done a pilot of 18 months with some brands and suppliers to look at some of the topics of the legislation and the repercussions into the value chain, from the double materiality, deeper environmental due diligence. And I think this could be really interesting for this group, and it will go into consultation with the World Gold Council, CIBJO, and RGC, of course, is we've actually built a mapping of the world to look at all the risks depending on the materials, but not just from a human rights perspective, but also from an environmental rights perspective. And that work is going through multi-stakeholder consultation, so civil society, key leading organizations, but also some key policymakers. Of course, in an ideal world, you will then go, with the experts on gold or colored gemstones to certain of those regions, if we're thinking about Mozambique, Madagascar, you name it. But I think that really needs a collective approach as an industry, and unfortunately today that's not happening. So I think you have a very good point there. Yeah.
So stronger policy. Okay, so we are coming up to time, but I just want to finish off with a question to each of the panelists. So in 2 to 3 years, what would a jewellery company in this room or online, those joining us online, what would they be doing differently if collaboration through the Gold Principles Group is working? And
first of all, I think the need to explain so much would be diminished. And what I mean by that is that we spend a lot of time just trying to explain some basic terminology, terms of business. What do you mean by this? What are you looking for? I think, would you say 2 years? 2 years is not that long. 3 years? What? Okay. What I would say is that the various players along the supply chain, including the consumers, know the questions to ask. They know the questions, they ask informed questions, and they know the value of what they're seeking. I think that sounds like a fairly simple thing, but actually I think it means that then allows you to have meaningful responses along the supply chain, because if I know what you're asking, I have to provide you with a meaningful answer. And I think that means that from the jewelers buying materials, the people in the intermediaries, whether it be brokers or refiners, and the producers, and that's not always miners, it can be other forms of supply depending on the material, that they know what they're going to be asked. That for me, knowing the question and hopefully allowing us to know what a good answer is, will get us further.
Suzanne.
I think that businesses would be more connected. They would know where to go to for the information in a more consolidated way. And I think more resilient, so they would have the understanding of the consumer, the landscape, because of the information that's out there and the depth and breadth of the data that's available to them.
That was quite nice and concise. Thank you. Iris.
I would say they do it. They action. They have the tools. They understand. And I really like what you say, Suzanne. They realize it's about business resilience, because when I spoke about compliance, I don't want to use that as an argument. It is about business value. We are a consumer-facing industry, so that desirability and that emotional connection that needs trust, and trust is a shared responsibility.
Gaetano.
Collaboration. I mean, Iris said that thanks to me, to CIBJO more than me, that we are bringing, as we have brought, all the organization under the same roof.
Exactly.
The organizations represent companies and people. And we are serving the industry because of the people and for the people. Having this kind of representative from the different organization here, it's not easy, because apparently we are sitting here, but it's not easy, because each one is busy, each one has its own procedure, but we have found naturally, not because we were pushed to do that, the opportunity to work together, to literally use each other, and the result that each constituency is bringing to the table. Because at the end of the day, you know, let me make a sort of comparison with, because my name and your name, you know, the knights of the round table, right?
Absolutely.
And we all sit in the round table. And the round table is round because no one is the head of the table, but everyone collectively are the head of the table. So this industry is united, could be more united once we will reach finally everyone that we are. I mean, I am very open to be criticized, whatever. Important is that there is a benefit towards the industry and from the industry to the consumers and vice versa. You know, each one of us is doing things. RJC with the certification, with all the rules, quite strict, or very strict, which is okay, you know. A Watch and Jewelry initiative with the pillars, World Gold Council, Platinum, I mean, and the companies, I don't know, Gemfields, just to mention one that is highly represented in the room, but, and many others, it's essential that we work in that kind of direction. Still, every comment, every criticism, every input is welcome, because at least, I mean, this is not, none of us is God, right? So we are not the warden of the truth, but still we try to bring whatever we can, considering the skill, the knowledge, the scientists, the elements we have, to bring a positive thing, benefit towards the consumers.
Thank you. I know that we're a couple of minutes over and we do need to conclude. But Iris is asking for one more comment on that, and then I'm going to conclude,
yes,
because we do need to wrap up.
Allow me, you know, maybe I'm now the old lady in the room, but I've known Dr. Gaetano when I was 30, I'm now 55. My point is, in those 25 years, we were never so many times in a room together, and I think it's the mindset. I think we all need to have the mindset. We're not here to compete we're not here to compete on trust, no, because if it's broken, we're all hit as an industry. So how can we bring the best of all these organizations together, not reinvent the wheel, and be complementary to one another? And then we're going to shine, all of us, you know, towards that trust to the consumer.
Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there in terms of leaving it on inclusive, open collaboration. That's what this panel is about. And I would like to thank those of you that are joining us online. Those of you that are in the room, thank you for your questions. And finally, I think you can join me in thanking both CIBJO for your wonderful hosting and running the event. Thank you. And indeed, the whole panel for those excellent inputs. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you all.